Turn for home in the Holy Bull, an Irish war cry, set down for the drive by Joel Rosario and maintains a 2-length lead, and he's strong up front. Gunnevera can only watch and wonder from second, then Classic Empire third, well back to the others, but the Holy Bull to Irish war cry.
This is Saratoga track announcer Larry Colmus, and you're listening to the Paddock Pass on 104.5 The Team.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Paddock Pass. I am your host, Brian Mariano. Now, of course, we have a ton of stuff to talk about. We weren't able to do a show last week filling in. It was Super Bowl week here at the team, so we had plenty of time to take care of the Super Bowl. Now we're back with prep races and everything ready to go, leading us to the first Saturday in May. Of course, you can hit us up on Facebook when we throw this up on the team Facebook page. As well, you can hit me up on Twitter at 1045 Mariano. We'll throw pics on all throughout the year now on Aqueduct, of course, Gulfstream Park, and anywhere else you start seeing all of these prep races for the Kentucky Derby. Well, before we get into the prep race that happened this past weekend at Gulfstream Park, let's look back 2 weeks ago to the Pegasus World Cup. Of course, later in the program, we're going to have the voice of Gulfstream Park on, that is Peter Aiello, to join and tell us what his experience was like for Pegasus Cup weekend. Of course, having the pressure of calling a $12 million race, the richest horse race in the world. He'll let us know how he thought the race came out and how exactly he was going to about it because of all the storylines going into that race. Let's start there. The storylines, of course, the last race of California Chrome's career, and of course the rematch with Arrowgate after the Breeders' Cup Classic. The issue I had with this race was, of course, I was texting with Pete that Monday right after the draw came out, and I texted him and a few friends saying, can you believe that California Chrome drew the 12 post in this race? And of course, we talked about it. It was not a secret at all from any of the horse players and any horsemen around the area to know that the 12 post at Gulfstream Park at 1 1/8 is absolutely death. There's no chance at all for this horse to win, and it showed. Anyone can be against me. I had a lot of conversations with people after this race. Of course, Arrowgate brings another stellar performance to the table, easily jumps ahead as one of the best horses in the world, of course, the best horse at the classic distance in North America. But the issue I had with this was the race was not going. There was 0% chance, in my opinion, as soon as California Chrome drew the 12 post, that he was going to win this race. Of course, you couldn't leave him off tickets because of all the great things he has done in his career, but there was no chance at all that this horse from the 12 post was 6 wide going into the clubhouse turn, had any chance, especially for the trip that Arrowgate got, sitting nice and tucked on the rail, and Mike Smith had just enough room to get him out right at the half-mile pole and to win easily going away. But for anyone, I would love to hear you guys on Twitter too, if you can let me know what you think about this race. I know we're a little past the time, but keep the conversation going because honestly, I think that Arrowgate had one of his better races of his career. I still think the Travers one up there is probably one of the best, obviously with the Breeders' Cup Classic. They switched the time. He actually did break the track record for a 1 1/8 at Gulfstream Park. But honestly, if you watch the race again, California Chrome 6 wide at the clubhouse turn. Victor's using all of him up as early as possible to make sure he can get some position going into the far turn. But even before they get to the far turn, Victor has to hustle this horse to try and keep up, and you could tell that he had nothing left as they turned for home, almost being pulled up at the end of his career. And it's unfortunate for all of the connections, Art Sherman and Victor Espinoza, all of the connections for California Chrome, that he has to go out that way. So in my opinion, the post absolutely was a detriment to California Chrome and really gave him no chance to win this race. A lot of people will come at me saying, of course, if he is a super horse, if he's in the realms of talks of California Chrome, Secretariat's best horses of all time, he should have won that race. But honestly, that you're asking so much for this horse to do in a time frame where it doesn't really, I mean, how often is he running at this point, late January? Yes, he had a nice, easy prep race out at Los Al, but I mean, honestly, as soon as you ask this horse to go to the 12 post and I ask him to win from out there with a beast of a horse inside of him getting the best trip of you could possibly think of, saving all the ground inside. I don't think this horse had a chance at all. Of course, this is the Paddock Pass. I am your host, Brian Mariano. You can follow me on Twitter at 1045 Mariano. Make sure you check in about 10 minutes or so. Peter Aiello, the voice of Gulfstream Park. We'll see what he feels. We'll see if he thinks that the 12 post was the reason for California Chrome's bad race, or was there actual issues after the race, as Art Sherman said, with his knee. Another big race that happened at Gulfstream Park was this past weekend, and that, of course, was the Holy Bull Stakes, one of the first prep races at Gulfstream Park for the 3-year-olds for the Kentucky Derby. And we had the Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner, Classic Empire, coming back after his win at Santa Anita in November. And the horse I liked here was Gunnevera. I'm going to ask Pete what he thought of his trip, because honestly, I thought this trip was horrendous. The horse runs a game second and didn't have any sort of trip. Stuck down on the inside the entire time, tries to get out the top of the stretch, gets bumped a few times, tries to get outside, can't, and by the time he does, he cannot run down Irish War Cry. Great ride here, because Joel Rosario just kind of went out to the lead and said, you got to come and get me. Come and beat me. And I don't think he could. This 3-year-old out of Curlin was really impressive in this race. So, and then there's, of course, talks, Classic Empire, Mark Cassidy talking about having issues with him. We'll see how he comes out of this race, because there's, we're still a long way from the first Saturday in May. So I'm interested to see how exactly this race turns out to go next to the Fountain Youth, then, of course, to the Florida Derby in April. Honestly, my horse right now would be Gunnevera going forward. If we're talking just horses coming out of this race, plenty of races to show up. Make sure you follow these horses as they continue on in many of these prep races. Of course, this weekend, we have the Sam F. Davis down at Tampa Bay Downs. And Tampa's always seemed to have horses that will be around in these prep races, because, of course, you remember Destin from last year hanging around and showing up, and, of course, killing me in that photo at Belmont, and, of course, losing in the Jim Dandy as well. So this race is going to be interesting. I think this is set up, obviously, for the Tampa Bay Derby. A lot of good horses here. Mark Cassidy sends out State of Honor, grabbing the rail. Fact Finding with Todd Pletcher, a nice 3-year-old there for him. And obviously the one everyone's talking about is Ian Wilkes' McCracken on the outside, 3-year-old by Go Sapper here. And if I have to play this race, I'll probably be playing a lot of pick 4s. And if I'm playing just this race alone, I'll play $1 exacta box. I'll take State of Honor inside Mark Cassidy and Julian Leparoux. You can't really go wrong with those connections there. I'll take Fact Finding, the 3, Todd Pletcher and John Velasquez for Stone Street Stables. And, of course, I'll grab the 2 outside horses as well. The number 8, McCracken, your 2-1 morning line favorite for Brian Hernandez and Ian Wilkes. Of course, No Dozing for Daniel Centeno on the outside, a 3-year-old by Union Rag. So, of course, if I'm playing the race, it's $1 exacta and triple boxes. We'll go with 1, 3, 8, 9 in the Sam F. Davis this weekend. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at 1045 Mariano. We'll keep you informed on everything happening this weekend at Gulfstream, Aqueduct, and, of course, Tampa Bay Downs. Peter Aiello, the voice of Gulfstream Park, is going to join us in just a couple minutes. And I want to hear from you guys. Make sure you hit me up, of course, on Twitter at 1045 Mariano. We'll go through everything. And the Pegasus Cup, I think, was a huge, huge success, because if you look at it to where you drew 12 very good horses, 2 super horses, and then 12 very good horses to show up, having owners throw up $1 million a piece to come and run in this race. And then you get the big names, Chad Brown coming there for a few races on the undercard, Todd Pletcher running a horse as well, and, of course, Bob Baffert running Arrowgate. Arrowgate looking like he's going across the pond. We're going to Dubai, the same road California Chrome did last year, winning the Dubai World Cup. Interesting to see where he goes after that. Has to be installed as the early favorite going over to Dubai, though. Interesting to see how that will turn out. And, of course, Arrowgate has to be the top horse looking at right now in our rankings. We'll go with Arrowgate on top. Of course, we have all of your needs, everything you want for horse racing. We have you taken care of here on the Paddock Pass, and we'll look at the phone lines. We have the voice of Gulfstream Park, Peter Aiello, joining us on his way, I'm assuming, to Gulfstream Park there, Pete?
Yeah, you hit hit the nail on the head, and we didn't even talk about that before we got on air.
I know. I heard the voice almost like you were on the way, ready to call some great races today. Let's start with 2 weeks ago, the richest race in the world, the Pegasus World Cup. Take me through that week. What was that week like for you? Preparations and everything, especially going through the draw on Monday all the way through the race on Saturday.
Well, I don't want to give you I'll try to give you the amended long version of that because there's some interesting stuff that happened. But, for me, it was my second chance at a Grade 1 race. And having not, metaphorically speaking, having somewhat struck out or foul-tipped the first Grade 1 attempt, I was a little nervous, being thrust back into the spotlight, especially with the idea that it's the very first running of the race. It's the final race for California Chrome. It's the rematch in the Breeders' Cup. There were just so many storylines going in that creatively I was having a really tough time as to, what I was going to say, what I wanted to say, not sounding too cliche, but also wanted to, say some stuff that would be memorable if it ended up playing out the way we hoped it would with Irrigator California Chrome winning the race. So I struggled. I talked to all of my friends who are announcers, Larry Comas, Travis Stone, Dave Rodman, Vic Stauffer, Frank Miramati. I talked to all of them and got differing advice. Some of it was in line with the way I do things. Some of it was outside the box from the way I do things. And I still struggled creatively to figure out what I was going to say. So the Wednesday before the Pegasus, I actually got to go to a Don Henley concert here locally. Nice. And he was so good that I allowed myself to stop for 1 minute thinking about the Pegasus and the pressure of Saturday. And wouldn't you know, when I did stop thinking about it, creatively, I had everything figured out then.
Of course. Isn't it great how that works out, Pete? Now, let's talk about that a little bit. You said you talked to Larry and Travis a little about how the call should have gone, and I noticed a lot throughout your call, which in my opinion you nailed. I thought it was fantastic. But look at it to where you seem to focus a lot on California Chrome and Arrowgate. Was that designed because obviously these two were the focus of this race? Yeah,
that was absolutely the design, and that was one of the things that, Larry, Travis, and I were all very good friends, but stylistically, I don't have a lot of similarities between Travis and Larry as far as the way I do things, routine-wise, and even to some extent the way I call the race. But that was one thing that I took from both of them. They both said that, that regardless of what you do or what you say, you should obviously make the race about the storyline going in, which is not only California Chrome's last race, but the rematch between Chrome and Arrowgate. On paper, they're supposed to be the ones that, you want to focus on. So from that standpoint, I absolutely, by design, made sure I commented on those two as much as I could.
So, Pete, when we look at the race itself, I was very skeptical, and I remember texting you right after the draw on Monday about California Chrome grabbing the 12 post. Do we really think that had a big impact on this race because of where he drew, or can we just say Arrowgate was much the best in this race?
Well, I think there's a lot of different factors. I mean, he was 6 wide going around the first turn, which you're not going to win races on this racetrack being 6 wide on the first turn. That said, he obviously didn't fire his best shot, so he gets a pass for that. Unfortunately, it was the wrong time in his career to get a pass. Now, of course, we can all sit here and guess as to what would have happened had he been brought his A game. As far as I'm concerned, it didn't matter whether he brought his A game or his A-plus game. Arrowgate was going to win that race. It was just a freakish performance by a very talented horse.
Talking to Pete Aiello, the voice of Gulfstream Park. Of course, you can get him on Twitter at @AnnouncerPete. Now, Pete, let's fast forward a little bit to this past weekend when we had the Holy Bull Stakes and a little bit of an upset with Irish War Cry here. Classic Empire, who won the Juvenile back at the Breeders' Cup, now comes back, doesn't fire his best effort. What did you make of this race this past weekend?
Well, I think it's a little too soon to draw too many conclusions as to where they are with Classic Empire, the Mark Casse barn, and where Graham Motion is with Irish War Cry. I thought that from a tactical standpoint, Irish War Cry was aided by the way the race flowed out. He was left alone up front. The racetrack was playing fast that afternoon, so take nothing away from him. He ran super, but there were some other alibis, too. Gunnevera was making his first start off the layoff. Classic Empire was making his first start off the layoff. They both were racing against the bias. They didn't go overly fast in that race. So I think there are some conclusions we can draw from that race, but I think it's just a little too soon to draw those conclusions.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, Pete, of Gunnevere, especially watching his win in the Delta Down Jackpot. I think he has that nice sweeping move, almost like Exaggerator had last year, and proven he can win, whether it's on an off-going or not. I think he had a lot of trouble in this race. I remember you calling a few times where he had checked up, and especially at the top of the stretch, had trouble getting outside for clear running. Do you think without all these factors, he could have won this race?
I know Javier Castellano felt that way. He told Antonio Sano that after the race. I don't actually think so, because I don't think they got to the bottom of Irish Warcry. I think Rosario was just trying to keep his mind on business. I don't think it would have mattered, but I definitely think he'll be a lot better next time than he was last time.
So, Pete, now you're getting into kind of a lull moment here in Gulfstream Park before we get back to the 3-year-old races for the Kentucky Derby with the Fountain of Youth coming next month and, of course, the Florida Derby. What's a typical day for you like now, especially being the full-time guy at Gulfstream Park?
Well, there's definitely no lull, that's for sure. We have a Grade 1 race this Saturday with the Gulfstream Park Turf Handicap, and I'll tell you, running 12 races, and with all the stuff that I do between races as far as doing the voiceover for the replay show, trying to keep the simulcast outlets updated on what's going on with our wagering menu and our post times. Saturdays are busy from the time I get up to the time I go home.
So, Pete, now, and of course, giving us time on this wonderful Paddock Pass program to talk about the Pegasus and everything else, what do you see now in the future? Do you see any changes with maybe the distance for the Pegasus Cup? Because I know there was a lot of people talking about the 1 1/8 distance as opposed to going back to 1 1/4. Do you think you could see any changes for next year?
Well, I know one thing that internally here we thought was a foregone conclusion, which would be that the Pegasus World Cup would move next year to Santa Anita. But after hosting the press conference and after the dust has settled, speaking to Belinda and Frank Stronach, I don't think the race is going to move. So that's exciting because we'll get another shot at it, and certainly that'll be exciting. But on to your point, with the race not moving, I don't know what discussion there's been of moving the distance of the race, but I think that that's definitely on the table right now. I don't know that there's been a decision one way or the other, but if you're going to run 12 horses and $1 million buy-in, you almost, in my view, have to move it because you can't win out of the 12 hole. It's just not fair. You should get a refund if you draw the 12 hole.
And then that's exactly what I felt like when I texted you after the draw. I'm like, California Chrome was right up against it after that race. The voice of Gulfstream Park, Pete Aiello, joining us now. Pete, before I let you go, I know I follow you on Facebook and Twitter and everything. Got to mention a little bit of the Royal Rumble, man. What the heck happened there? You get who is it? Came out in 30. Help me.
Roman Reigns.
Roman Reigns. I was sitting with a buddy of mine. I go, what is happening here? What did you make of that?
We could have a completely different podcast.
We'll start a whole new one, me and you, buddy.
It would be no holds barred. I can tell you this, though, Brian. I was looking forward to that pay-per-view from a creative standpoint more than I've looked forward to a pay-per-view in a long time. I have never been more disappointed.
Oh.
You had so many good, talk about storylines. The storylines that could have come out of that pay-per-view being set up for WrestleMania in Orlando this year, you could have set up all the matches, all the cards, or at least planted the seeds for potential conflicts for WrestleMania. You had Goldberg, Brock Lesnar, and The Undertaker in one match, and coming out of that match until the next night or the next week, it did nothing. I couldn't. It was mind-blowing to me that they did that, but I guess anymore I'm not shocked about what the creative team does in the WWE. We're
going to see you at WrestleMania, in April in Orlando, huh?
I wish. Unfortunately, the weekend kind of prevents that. But,
yeah.
Maybe they'll do another Hell in a Cell down here, and I can go to that. That was the last event I went to.
There you go. Of course, we talk WWE. We talk, of course, horse racing, the voice of Gulfstream Park, Pete Aiello joining us. Pete, I appreciate you taking the time, man. Of course, we'll catch up in a few weeks when the Fountain of Youth and, of course, the Florida Derby come down to South Florida. Thanks again, man.
No problem, Brian. Enjoy yourself.
Thank you, Pete. Of course, love having you on the program, man. And Pete always giving us good insight. And we got to throw in a little WWE. Got to break the mold a little bit as we get into the heart of the 3-year-old schedule. Of course, we'll grab Pete in a few weeks when we have the Fountain of Youth later in March. And then, of course, the Florida Derby. We appreciate you guys checking on the Paddock Pass. Make sure you check in next week. We'll review the Sam F. Davis and look into other 3-year-old prep action for the first Saturday in May. It is Brian Mariano in the Paddock Pass, and we'll see you in the paddock.